Thank you very much, Gabriele. Good morning, everybody. I really wish when I was studying to be part of such programs. I think it's really wonderful compilation and so many things get together. I called my day Dear Friends or Enemies, Perhaps. And this is actually a quote from how Marinetti started to address the audience when he was performing or beginning the famous futurist evenings, serate, futuriste. And it was from the first moment somehow this performative utterance that would already divide, make a divide between him speaking and the audience who was there and was supposed to position themselves. Somehow he wanted, or he was aiming at immediately having the response of the audience that would have to define or antagonize. He would antagonize them, and they would have to define or defend themselves against the person. And this somehow is, I think, what maybe Marx and what Claire Bishop writes about, and we will talk about it in the second. The beginning also of the political theater. So the theater that not only necessarily represents, but somehow has this performative force, and performative in the sense of being subversive and also effective, or making the world in the same time. And I'm using this, performative. We never really know exactly what performative means. It can have so many meanings, but I'm using actually a meaning from Mackenzie book, Perform or Else. I was actually supposed to start to speak before introducing all the human beings that I invited today. I also wanted to introduce the curtain and the history of the curtain, but I will leave it at the end. So just wanted to tell you that, can I actually could have an image of the curtain, that there is no, or there used to be no theater without the symbolic or metaphorical curtain opening. Today, the curtain has vaguely disappeared from the theater. We rather see the curtain appearing in different spheres, and one of these spheres, migration of the curtain, is the sphere of visual arts. And the history of the curtain and this migration it's kind of interesting for me, and I will try to refer to that. There is also some curtain elements in the room, and you will think or stay with it for the whole day, and we'll come back to the curtain at the end. Just to mention that actually Malevich Black Square was first drawn as a theater curtain back in 1913 for the Victory Over the Sun, for the famous futurist opera in Petrograd. And he later made a Black Square in 1915 as the beginning of suprematism, but he antedated it. He went back to the moment in which he created the Black Square as a curtain. And this opens the whole universe, but just to save a little bit of time, we'll come back, since a curtain is this divide and is this instrument of forgetting or instrument of dividing. It will come back and will reappear at the end. So I will just very briefly introduce the whole day. We will start somehow with somebody that doesn't need to be introduced because has been introduced so many times. So Claire Bishop, and Claire is nowadays into different research, but I was very happy that I was able to persuade her to go back and to revisit one of the first chapters of her book, Artificial Health, about the futurism and about the spectatorship under futurism, and I think this will give some kind of a key terms, key notions for the whole day. So we will speak about that. Then we will continue with the documentary theater, Moscow Trials. It's an experiment that Swiss-German theater director Milo did in the Theater Dog and Sakharov Center in Moscow back in 2010. I will also, at the beginning of each slot, I will give much more precise introduction to that. It will be commented by Ekaterina Degot, an art historian, curator from Russia, now based in Cologne. Everybody will be introduced in later on, in particular. And then in the afternoon, there will be a little introduction to what political theater is today by Florian Malzacher, followed by dialogue between Florian and Stodzielec, so collective from St. Petersburg, very active on many fields, but also on the performative field. And we will try to arrange it a little bit as you can see, it all a little bit looks like a talk show setting today. So we will try to arrange it in the dialogue between Dimitri Wileński and Florian Malzacher as a small retrospective of different performative works that Studium has been involved in, so with the theater or with the performance, with the performative format. And then we will finish by something that might be a bit dull, but yet I think extremely interesting. It's a new work of Artur Żmijewski, of a Polish artist, who 2 years ago staged in one of the Warsaw theaters and then in a Krakow theater a Holy Mass. So basically he just performed or directed a Catholic ceremony, a Holy Mass, took it from the church to the theater stage, and of course in Catholic Poland it has been a very tormented event, and we will also speak about that. And then, as I said, I will finish by a short history of the curtain. So the curtain will be this element that at the beginning has to be removed and then has to be brought back in order to form some kind of a demarcating reality of this day. Yeah, so now I would like to introduce and invite on the stage Clare Bishop. Claire, please, let's move there. And yeah, over there. And we need a laptop, yeah, with us there. Yeah, I'm coming. We need a laptop. We need also her laptop.
Yeah, well, let's leave this.
Yeah, let's leave it. Okay. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. Good morning. Well, yeah, Claire, again, thank you to come back, because I know that, you felt like you are somewhere else. You wrote this book too, or it appeared like 2 years ago or more.
At least
2 years ago. So you felt like,
actually, when you finish writing a book, at least a year before it appears. So actually now it's 4 years since
exactly.
I was writing it.
So I know that when we spoke, you felt like, okay, this is for you a
Not
Christmas
again.
tale from yesterday. But still, I think since it is some kind of a lens through which we look today at the thing, at the visual arts, let's just go back for it, and then you can forget it, and you can concentrate on your day tomorrow, which is completely different on this killing. But anyhow, in your book you are saying that actually theater is a crucial medium to look at the lens of visual arts, as a way of reading visual arts, and not as it was done so far with installation or history of painting. So what made you look at the theater out of a sudden?
When you present it like that, it makes it sound like I set out to write a book. Let's look at art through the lens of theatre. And especially these few days have also maybe reinforced that impression. In fact, it was something I arrived at right at the end, because you always write the introduction last to a book. Yeah? So it was when I was writing the introduction, I thought, actually, all of this, the most useful way of thinking through this is through theatre. But what I thought I was setting out to do was to write a kind of history and theory of participatory, socially engaged art. The kind of art that involves mobilizing groups of people, different social constituencies, whether they're named or it's a random public, into some kind of event or situation or performance. And increasingly, it seemed to me that the idea of having people as a medium, the thing that tied together all the work that I discussed in my book was people. And all of the images, if you look through my book, I have to say the images are pretty bad. Most of them are black and white, fuzzy images of people in a street, or in a room doing something that you can't really work out what it is, because
reading something together.
Yeah, reading, maybe reading, eating, walking, doing something. And initially I wanted 200 images in the book, and the publisher cut it right down because they said the images are really repetitive. They all look the same. So I realized that when we're dealing with people as a medium, that the most appropriate way of writing about it, given that the images, that's still to say, I still think you can work something out from the images, but in fact you're dealing with an experience. The image is just a document of a larger experience that may actually have been months or even years long in the case of some contemporary socially engaged practice. And so the model for me for discussing this work seemed to be that of used in relationship to performance and to theatre. So maybe it's a little bit of an exaggeration to say that theatre is central to looking at visual art, but it did make me reflect after I'd written the whole book. Maybe it's important to try and think of what a history of 20th century art would look like through the lens of theatre, with Brecht as a central figure, rather than, say, Greenberg and painting, which has been a dominant model, especially in America. Or, for example, the ready-made, which is the model that I think more or less underpins the art since 1900 doorstep of a textbook.
But you also reverse this paradigm of the participation, and the participation as we understand it today, and actually what was the origin. You trace the origins of participation, and then you find them in the theater, actually. You find them in these futurist evenings, yeah? So I wanted to a little bit speak about the futurists and their construction and the construction of spectatorship, because one of the twists is that we tend to think of participation today in the very conciliatory manner, very nice events, people coming together, and especially, it has been appropriated by politicians a lot, and as we know in UK particularly, that you come from. Yeah, and many different contexts.
Countries. The UK and the Netherlands are really the two that have really instrumentalized socially engaged art the most, I think.
Yeah, but actually what was so striking in your book is to see that the very beginning of participation is this moment when Marinetti comes on stage during Serate Futuriste and says, "Dear enemies," or perhaps their friends, or perhaps enemies perhaps. So he's actually already starting from this antagonistic moment. So can you tell us a little bit more how you looked at this Serate Futuriste? What were actually the Serate Futuriste in the first place, and how was the spectatorship constructed in them?
I mean, I should start with a disclaimer that I am not an Italian futurism expert. Yeah, I can barely understand Italian. So anyone listening to this in the audience or watching this in future online, please, I'm not an expert. However, I was looking at this, as you say, as a sort of an unusual beginning point for participation. And when we think of something taking place in a theatre, from today's perspective, it seems maybe quite conventional that there was it's a proscenium frame, the artists are on stage, the audience is in the audience, and this seems maybe at first glance to us to be quite traditional. On the other hand, the way in which these events are constructed is to absolutely maximize the participation of the audience, not in the sense that we understand it today as everybody making the work of art together, but rather to catalyze a reaction from the audience that is extreme, that's hostile, that's violent, that even ends in a fight. So maybe we should start with some images. And the first one I just wanted to put up, when you think about what art in public space was at the turn of the last century, it would be. Let's think of sculpture in the new form of the biennial, which began in 1895. Sculpture adorning buildings, or sculpture outside in public space would be something like Rodin. You can move it forward. So then to have something that occurs in a theatre as a form of public art is. Well, I guess let's go forward again and forward. Sorry, these are not in any order. Yeah, but to have something that's occurring in a theatre, but which is preceded by a large PR operation, which involves being in the streets, handing out leaflets, sending press releases to newspapers, and generally drumming up support so that people in their thousands come to these very large opera houses from 1910 onwards in order to see these events. So if you go back an image. This is an example of the kind of literature that's being promoted. So the Futurist Manifesto is on the front page of Le Figaro, the most important newspaper in France. This is a huge achievement. I mean, imagine an artist statement making the front page of, the New York Times or the Guardian. And then this one, it's written in French, so I don't quite know why. But there's another sort of publicity stunt that they do in 1910 is to climb to the top of the Campanile in St. Mark's Square in Venice and shower 8,000 leaflets from the top of the Campanile onto the public below. And then if you go forward, we can actually start to talk about what some of these events are. So you've got this, so here's a sketch by Boccioni, which shows people on stage and then this, onslaught of missiles being cast at the audience. But you can also see that they were, accounts of them sound very chaotic, but they're actually quite structured. So if you look at the poster on the left, it's clearly in three parts. You've got The first bit is, I can't quite read it, you've got poetry, and then you've got a painting and sculpture by Boccioni, and, hang on, that's the second one. You know, alla vita. Sorry, I can't quite see it from this angle. Sinfonietta. So it starts with music, then it's poetry, and then it ends with painting and sculpture. I guess the other thing to think about this is just how 19th century the typography looks. Yeah, it's like even though later on, actually within a matter of years, futurist typography is something much more adventurous. Actually, if you go forward a slide, yeah, you see this is the kind of thing that starts to be done within a few years, but maybe onwards an image again. So the serate are like evening length events which could comprise music, declamations of political manifestos, of poetry, and I think most importantly from the visual arts perspective, people putting canvases and sculptures on stage. So that it effectively amounts to an alternative form of exhibition space, one in which the work is in direct confrontation with an audience. And yeah, I think this is unusual. And actually, worth noting.
Maybe what's worth mentioning is that actually theaters back then was the mass audience venues. You know, it's hard to imagine for us now today, but this is where 90% of the society would go to. So of course they went to the theaters, or they went. That was the place to address a mass audience. Of course, newspaper too, but that's why somehow Futurists chose the theater as one of the propagating strategies. Yeah, and it was also very propagandistic. Yeah, there was a lot of political messages in going on the stage, and
yes, and you know, increasingly overt political messages as the 1910s proceed.
Mm-hmm. But how was? Can you talk a little bit more about this relation with the audience? So how did they exactly address the audience? I remember that there were moments, you know, the audience also liked to be agitated, yeah. And I read somewhere that when there was kind of a dialogue. That you know, audience was gradually getting prepared for these evenings and bringing tomatoes or bringing other elements.
For sure, yeah, you know, bringing eggs, tomatoes, and then even, actually I think it's one of the Dada soiree in Paris in 1921, even bringing along bits of beef. So people bringing along meat. I mean, this is a real investment, right? To bring some food along. I mean, you're really prepared. Mm-hmm. And so there's a deliberate cultivation and you know, annoyance of the audience, which is also done. I'm going to read you a little quote about some of the things that they did. So techniques which are used to provoke conflict. So in the Variety Theatre Manifesto, and I'm going to come back to Variety Theatre in a minute, they suggest spreading a powerful glue on some of the seats so that the male or female spectator will stay glued down and make everyone laugh. I mean, can you imagine what that, you know, the dry cleaning bill and that would ensue today? Selling the same ticket to 10 people, so there's a traffic jam, bickering and wrangling. Offering free tickets to gentlemen or ladies who are notoriously unbalanced, irritable, or eccentric, and likely to provoke uproars with obscene gestures, pinching women, or other freakishness. And then finally, sprinkling the seats with dust to make people itch and sneeze. Yeah. So these are already, you know, you can see these kind of things are before anyone's even got on stage. There's an atmosphere of, you know, of tension and friction and irritation.
Mm-hmm. But there was actually, of course, it sounds very funny, but there was something else in this agenda too. There was the feeling maybe of empowering the audience, you know, of how.
Yeah. So
just to go back to the tomato thing. So people were ready to throw tomatoes, and then the futurists would respond, "Don't throw a tomato, throw an idea, an idiot." You know, so like think for yourself, you know, and so this is what I wanted to ask you more about.
I mean, there's always a question of, you know, like antagonism to what ends, and the ends for Marinetti and his colleagues were to build confidence in the audience, and this building of confidence would be marshal towards you know, a stronger national sentiment, an embrace of the future, of technology, of militarism, of colonial expansion. And generally getting Italy out of the past. You know? There was a feeling they were constantly railing against what they called passéism. Passe, what is, you know, the past. I don't know how else to paraphrase it. And you can imagine that from a cultural perspective, in Italy, this was so dominant. You know, you've got the Renaissance. All of these artists are living with the legacy of this, well, and also, you know, classical Roman architecture as well. I mean, this is the country that's the, you know, in many senses, the cradle of European, you know, cultural activities, you know, for centuries. And so they want to make a break with that. They feel that Italy is too, you know, admired in the past, and they want instead to be embracing the future and to move ahead, to embrace technology and war, and, you know, to become more robust, confident, a more robust, confident nation. Mm-hmm. And you can see in sort of the manifesto, they describe this as the serate as a form of training. You know, there's like a kind of, you know, gymnasium for the mind and the spirit. You know, building up this, you know, violent, aggressive, warlike mentality that's also about, you know, pride and confidence in the culture.
Yeah, but how about somehow this stance? Like there was this national and pro-war agenda. Yeah, but how? In your conversation with Boris Groys, you also think he's saying something very interesting, that we are actually allowed to love futurism because it failed so much on this nationalistic and pro-war level. You know, there is one aspect. How do you look at this, and how do you differentiate somehow this as a strategy from what it actually propagated in the military terms?
Okay. You mean in the kind of the history of Italy and its rather pathetic attempts at colonial
involvement,
expansion?
In this national.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, you know, Italy undergoes a very, you know, unpleasant fascist dictatorship until the Second World War. So I don't think we can really say that it failed on that level. For, you know, the Futurists achieved their goal. Marinetti grew ever closer to Mussolini. And that affected the course of you know, the futurist theatre and artistic production through the 20s and 30s. Hang on, what was your question again?
Well, I mean, this, I guess, you know, why we are still allowed to
why are we allowed to like, you know, futurism? Because that's a good question. You know, because there is this incredible energy and inventiveness and, you know, a naughtiness that verges on the infantile. I think for all these reasons, it's you know, it's an incredibly exciting moment that sets a lot of things in motion, whether it's Russian futurism in the 1910s or Dada in Zurich and Paris, you know, 5-7 years later.
And let's go back to the variety theatre. You also wanted to say something more about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important. So when you said, you know, 90% of Italians go to the theatre, this is, of course, bourgeois theatre. This is very middle class, plays written for middle class and aristocratic audiences. The model that Marinetti wanted to take was the variety theatre. So a kind of a lower class form of, I don't know, in Britain we call it a music hall theatre. I don't know what it would be called here, but people were, you know, smoking, so that there's a, you know, kind of the atmosphere of smoke already creates a unity between audience and performers. There's slapstick, stand-up comedy. Well, what other kind of things? You know, gymnastics. Sorry. Magicians, yeah. So this kind of, you know, it's this kind of lower class entertainment is taken as the model for what they want to do, and I think this is, you know, and there's also a lot of interaction with the audience. Yeah, there's heckling, people are shouting things, and there's, you know, direct communication with
he was actually saying that variety theatre is alone in seeking audience collaboration. So that was for him the only model he could base himself on in what futurist evenings were. Yeah, I have also a quote here. The variety theatre is alone in seeking audience collaboration. It doesn't remain static like a stupid voyeur, but joins noisily in the action, in the singing, accompanying the orchestra, communicating with the actors in surprising actions and bizarre dialogues. Yeah, or he was also introducing common smoking. You know, the futurists on the stage would smoke, and the audience was allowed to also smoke, and it created some kind of an egalitarian feeling between two sides. Yeah.
Keen smokers in the audience there, wanting to join in.
But what is somehow that remains from those futurist moments up till today in the participatory strategies?
Well, I think within a history of participatory art, it kind of cuts two ways. There's a lineage of, you know, as you mentioned before, very ameliorative, you know, community forging types of art, and a more constructivist model, you know, that maybe aspires to be forming utopian alternative to the alienation experienced in everyday capitalist life. And on the other hand, there's a more antagonistic, conflict-ridden, divisive model of participatory art that seeks to create conflict as what I would call a negation of negation. Yeah? So it's negating the ameliorative solution to the alienation.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe that's too complicated. And then in terms of what I think it's, I was thinking about this morning. What is a futurist aesthetic today? And I was trying to think what that might be. Actually, could you just move forward a little bit? I don't know that I have images of it, but there was a big futurism exhibition in New York last year, and it ended with, if you can move forward again, and again, these kind of images, like the one on the right, these truly hideous works from the 1930s. And on the left, by the way, is an image of Balla in 1931 wearing a crazy suit designed by someone called Gianelli. And these works from the 30s are so, the militarism is really, can really be felt in the aesthetic in a way that you don't get them from the paintings of the early 1910s, which are more about city life and speed and transportation. And I don't know, I went to see, this sounds like a digression, but it's not. I went to see the 3D IMAX version of Gravity last year. And that does not have a futurist aesthetic, but the trailers before the film absolutely did. And these are films that have not necessarily, they're not winning Oscars, but these are movies that are using CGI, that are using IMAX, and that are all revolve around some kind of mass battle scenes. And I thought, my God, this is really where the futurist fascist aesthetic occurs in our culture now, is in this kind of massive, Hollywood blockbuster IMAX movie.
Mm-hmm. So by confrontation or?
Well, actually, the confrontation is not there anymore. This is just the kind of, let's say, the aesthetic from the paintings. The confrontation, oh God. Let's think.
Artur Żmijewski, I think,
yes.
could be seen in this way.
Exactly, the kind of people that you're going to be presenting today.
Yeah, some. Well, I think I'll present the spectrum, because there is also this thought that, when you're a leftist theater maker, and I guess maybe we'll ask Stodzielec about it, that you do that through the training. So you don't confront people, you don't antagonize people. You kind of take them on board with you and train them in self-awareness, etc. And the futurist way would be the way rather for, I don't know if right-wing artists exist at all, but somehow those who inhibit this more confrontative model till today, like Renzo Martes or Artur Żmijewski, they might be seen maybe.
I would not call them. I would hesitate to call them right wing. They're taking a roundabout, circuitous path towards a goal. I mean, I think they have very humanist goals, but they're taking them through an indirect ethical route. That forces people to confront their values in a way that is much less reassuring than a model which is seeking to bring about unity and community.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so is there anything else in your presentation to add? No. Yeah. Do you have some? This is a very short session. But maybe you would have one or two questions to Claire before we stop for lunch.
Yes.
Question there. Thank you. This isn't so much a question as just a quick comment. And in terms of this idea of performance that's confrontational and so forth, I can't help but think of the punk movement in the 70s. In punk music, where musicians would take the stage and curse at the audience and literally spit on them, and the audience, I witnessed this, audience would spit back and so forth. For real. I mean,
yes, that's an excellent point. Yeah. And the connection between, actually, the connection between punk and situationism has been written about, but not actually. Few people take it back. I don't know anyone who's connected that back to futurism. But actually, it's very good that you brought that up, because Gavin Butt will be talking in this slot tomorrow morning about punk and post-punk. So I hope that some of that will come up. But it'll have a different frame on it tomorrow, because it'll be about a lack of virtuosity as opposed to a confrontation with the public. But thank you, that's a good point.
Thanks, Claire. Actually, I have one issue which really perplexes me, and actually, when you start to speak about futurists, actually, I haven't thought about them for a long time. It was pretty interesting last twist when most performative, most transgressive, most radical Russian artists, from Voina to Yelena Kavylina, from Yelena Kavylina to ex-Radek people, from ex-Radek people to some kind of young radicals, turned to take a side of the power, to take a side of the Putinism. And actually, could you speculate if there was something in aesthetic of early futurism which runs them directly into biggest supporter of Mussolini? Or is it just things happen? Or we can somehow find some hidden or maybe explicit elements of their aesthetic which actually bring them on the side of the power at one moment.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. I mean, whether futurism in its early years inevitably leads towards fascism, this is an important question.
No, it's not necessary. It leads towards, but when the power became so performative, so powerful, so radical, so can shit on any faces in society at any moment. So then futurists can join it immediately because they recognize it as a kind of friend. I mean,
I'm not quite following you. So are you saying that? So if it's not that futurism leads to fascism, is it what does fascism take from futurism? Is
exactly.
it the other way around? Yeah.
Exactly. I'm not sure. That's a question for me. I don't know. That's why how we can talk about that, how performativity of Putin is. When, you wanted to break any law. Yes, we break any law. We don't give a shit about any law from now on. And then all transgressive strategy immediately say, yes, it was exactly what we were about for last 10 days. And finally we got a big figure who actually embody our expectations. So something like that. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Yeah,
but something.
For sure. I'm thinking. I'm sure you are as well. Of Zhiliev's photo series where he presents Putin as a performance artist.
Yeah, that's also kind of the twist.
Yeah, I completely haven't thought about this from the other way around, and it's a very nice way of thinking through that. I would have to think about what Mussolini would take from fascism. I can't answer it, but I will think about it.
But what could possibly Putin take from Weimar Group, What could Putin take from Weimar Group?
No, that acceleration of machism and kind of demonstration of power of breaking the law and so on. That was actually explained. We want to... Weimar was about, then futurism also, it doesn't matter what you think, we fuck you. That Weimar was actually about that. And then Putin said, yeah, it's exactly what politics should be. Very simple, I guess. I mean, Weimar was pretty explicit. It was everywhere signed, we fuck you with our big dick. But when they found that some dick is bigger, so they meet say and respect it as a comrade, in a comradely way.
I'm sure we'll come back to it because the whole afternoon will be on Russia. So. Is there any more questions?
Well, thank you for your discussion, but I have just a small question. What happened to the humor? Because variety is very much coined by human laughter, and I don't know if futurism really, if there was some laughter and humor left, or if they turned this mode of spectatorship into militarism.
In terms of the serate, I think that there must have been maybe not laughter, but if we think of in terms of enjoyment, I think people must have enjoyed this hugely.
They were preparing themselves to go.
Yeah, like they're readying themselves. They were filling, as I said, audiences of 2,000 or 3,000 people going to the great opera houses to see these people who were notorious and maybe and celebrated figures. So I think we can talk about enjoyment, even if there might not, I don't know, who knows if there was laughter, but people have to have been enjoying themselves to go to these things. Yeah. And then, there's that famous line in Walter Benjamin about fascism being the mechanism that allows people to enjoy the spectacle of their own destruction. And that always comes back to mind. But I think this enjoyment in destruction, enjoyment in violence. The other contemporary connection I was trying to make across actually was with ISIS, and wondering whether there is an enjoyment in destruction that's there. I mean, what else is mobilizing young teenage girls to leave their schools and join this movement? I mean, this is the news in the UK over the last few weeks. There's been 3 teenage girls left school in East London to go and join ISIS. There's something about us, enjoying the spectacle of destruction and cultural destruction, as well as destruction of other people. But this is very unformulated, so let's not pursue that until I've thought about it a bit more.
Some last question? Here, in the first.
So you both stated very clearly that in the futurist time, the theater was more of a mass medium. So also in relation to what you say, that you look for the model of theater as a coming together of groups and so and so. But I'm thinking that today, this model of theater is not so relevant maybe anymore, and the theater model also changes. So what would it be today then, this kind of model that would
Come back tomorrow and you will find out. Yeah, there's much more about the digital and social media tomorrow, because arguably this kind of live presentation, co-presence, embodiment, and so on, the stakes of this have been completely changed by network communication technologies.
Yeah, but on the other hand, there is maybe one thing that didn't change so much, which is this affective dynamic. That still theater, even if it's much more secluded medium today, offers still the gathering of maybe humans and non-humans too, but of agents coming together and having some kind of a affective dynamic. And I remember when we talked in Krakow, you also said that also gradually you see yourself a bit more bored by visual arts and going towards contemporary dance or theater or this live performance, because there is this affective element that one doesn't necessarily
and
find.
You don't know, to what extent it is just being bored with visual art, because I live in New York and the market is so predominant and all-powerful there, or to what extent it's a counter-reaction to the fact that so much of our lives are spent on screen and looking at screens and communicating with people through screens. I do find myself moving more towards going to see a lot of performance and dance, and even if the performance and dance isn't very good, which is true a lot of the time, that's the nature of experimental dance and
you
performance.
cannot leave after 2 minutes, like from the gallery.
But there is a community in the audience. There are people that I like seeing, that I will always that you always run into there, and it provides a community in a much more it's smaller and more localized in a way that the art audience now isn't, because the art audience is now a mass audience. Millions of people go to museums each year, and and money really affects that relationship in a way that I think it doesn't with downtown theatre and experimental performance.
Okay, good. So I think, Claire, thank you very much for agreeing somehow to revisit
at high speed.
At the futurist speed at the beginning of your book. And we will continue on those questions, of course. So we will meet now. It's a few minutes past 12. So we will meet here 12:30 for the sessions on Milo Rao and a documentary take on the political theater in Russia today with Ekaterina Degot. Thank you.